Hello, everybody. LC Holt here, and this is my weekly update for July the 15th. I'm here. We're going to be talking about Ed Gein today, and sitting to my immediate right is Rebecca Ivey. Rebecca?
Hello.
And I have a very special guest today from the Great White North. You've probably seen another of our shows we did together. I was on his show, Carl's Creep Show. Mr. C.W. Penney.
Hey guys, how you doing?
I'm very good. I'm happy to have you on the show today, man. We're going to be talking about some crazy serial killer action. So welcome.
Hey man, it's nice to be here, and yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
All right, well, let's jump right into Mr. Ed Gein. Edward Theodore Gein. He was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, August 27th, 1906. He was the second two boys to a fella named George, who was a alcoholic gentleman, mother, Augusta. Now, Augusta was a homemaker, and she was also a crazy religious woman. She was a Lutheran by denomination. George owned a grocery store. Well, George did a lot of things other than drink. One of them was own a grocery store, which didn't really work out so well. So Augusta apparently asked George if he would help her get away from this unholy world, sell his grocery store, and use the money to buy a 195-acre plot of land in the neighboring Plainfield, Wisconsin, a place that had a population of 680. Very small spot. As I said, Augusta's point of view was get these kids as far away from this evil world as we possibly can. And she actually used to punish her kids for trying to make friends because you had to remove yourself entirely, according to her. Now, Ed was, as I said, he was the second, so he was the younger of the two boys, kind of a peculiar lad. He was only allowed to go into town to go to school, come back with no friends, heaven forbid that. But he, in school, was known to be slightly peculiar. People used to say he would even kind of chuckle at jokes that no one told, which, I don't know. I guess we've all known kids that were slightly odd. That doesn't necessarily make them homicidally crazy. CW, have you ever heard of, you ever had any friends that laughed at their own jokes for no reason?
I've had some friends that were a little bit different, we'll say it that way, but I mean, they all grew up to be fine. I mean, they're not Ed Geins of the world.
No butchers of Plainfield amongst them?
No, there's no butchers of Salmon Cove, Newfoundland here.
What about you, Beck?
No, I don't know any serial killers from school years.
Yes, only the cinematic kind.
Yes, just you.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so Ed's father, what happened to him, Beck?
Well, his father, George, dies of heart failure at age 66 on April 1st, 1940.
Okay, so Ed he's on up there. He was born in 1906, so his father dies in 1940 of heart failure. It should be noted that the brothers, Ed and Henry was the older brother's name, they became handymen around town. And Ed even used to babysit neighbors' children. He had a good relationship with kids. The impression I got, tell me if you think the same thing from your research, Carl. It was that he was childlike himself, Ed.
Yeah, it seemed that way. In one respect, I mean, like, he wasn't an odd character in the community. I mean, it almost seemed like he was like Uncle Ed to everybody. He was known, everybody liked him, he got along with children, and yeah, some stuff started happening.
Well, that's another thing that even they used to say that about Lee Harvey Oswald. When we were doing the JFK show, they used to say that Lee Harvey Oswald in the neighborhood where his wife was living when they were separated used to have more fun playing with the kids in the neighborhood than he did hanging around with his wife or any of the adults, because, you know, he was kind of like a kid, which you don't really think of when you think of Oswald, because he seems very overly serious.
Yeah, very true.
But Ed was, you could kind of see Ed playing with kids because he comes across in several stories that you hear, particularly later after, what happened. He had a kind of boyish quality, a slightly aloof. He was not mentally impaired in terms of learning disabilities. He was a pretty smart kid, and he was a very good reader, voracious reader. But Henry, his brother, actually kind of got away from the mother a little bit because he started dating a divorced woman in town that had 2 kids. Now, I'm sure Augusta did not care for that.
Yeah.
But Ed, but she still had Ed because he was at home. And Henry, the older brother, apparently would also speak poorly of Augusta when she wasn't around to Ed. And Ed didn't really care for that. Ed was very protective of his mother and very close with her. A love-hate relationship, you could almost say, but never outwardly hateful. He worshipped his mother in a way.
I think he, in a way, he kind of had a mother complex.
Yes, I think there was a lot of Oedipal stuff going on here, not only with the father, but with the brother, because he seemed very jealous of the attention everyone else got from his mother.
Yeah.
Which kind of plays into Ed's fate, or Henry's fate, if we want to talk about that real quick, because in May at 44, this was 4 years after the death of the father, Henry and Ed were burning some old brush there on the property. And this fire got out of control. And Ed lost track of his brother in the smoke, he said. So he ran back to the house and he got help. And they came out with flashlights and lanterns, and they searched the property where eventually they got the fire under control. And they found Ed's brother, Henry, laying face down on the ground with, according to some reports, bruises on his head. So some people believe that Ed might have murdered his own brother and used this fire as a way of hiding the crime.
It's very possible. Like you said, Ed did not appreciate the fact that his brother spoke ill of his mom. And somebody that was considered, I guess, a mommy's boy. I mean, he's only going to put up with it for so long. So, and what better way to try to cover it up would use a fire? Why not?
Right. And when you had Ed and the father and the brother and the mother, well, the father died. Now you have Ed and the brother and the mother. Well, you take the brother out of the equation, and that leaves you with Ed and his mother, which maybe Ed kind of preferred that. One way or another, he got it because Henry was the official cause of death was asphyxiation. They did not follow up on bruises, if indeed there were there. I mean, some cases leave that out. Books and true crime novels and stuff leave that out. But some people say he had bruises on his head. So, I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he took out the old bro.
Yeah. Well, shortly after that, though, his mother has a paralyzing stroke, and Ed becomes her caretaker.
Oh.
So this,
So even more.
Yeah.
That might have been a little bit heartbreaking for old Eddie. What do you say, CW?
Yeah. I don't know. I think the man, just in general, no matter what way you cut the cake, he had a big time complex. With his father gone and his brother gone, with or without him being the reason. I think he may have looked at it like, okay, it's just me and mommy. Now I get all of her attention, all of her love,
all the time.
All the time. It's just yeah, right.
Well, it's interesting because even though she had a stroke that was somewhat debilitating, she didn't lose any of her fire. Because there's a story that Ed told after everything went down about his mother going to buy some straw from a neighbor named Smith. And this is a very odd story. Ed said that him and his mother drove over to the Smith farm, and Mr. Smith was beating his dog. And Ed said as they watched, Mr. Smith beat his dog to death. And a woman came out of Mr. Smith's house and said, "Hey, what are you doing out there? Stop that." And after they went home, this is horrible, but after they went home, Ed said that his mother, Augusta, instead of being shocked about the man beating the dog to death, was just absolutely mortified that Smith had a woman living with him that was not his wife. Augusta called him Smith's harlot. Smith's harlot.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying she was a trollop, according to Augusta.
She was. And Augusta had this theory that every woman on the planet, other than herself, was evil.
Yes.
She tried to deter the kids. Like, they were all evil. And she, at a young age, tried to brainwash that into the both of them.
Didn't she say that they were prostitutes too? That every woman is a prostitute?
They were all evil, and they were all prostitutes except her.
She was the one good one. Well, Rebecca, now we know where you stand. Holt's harlot right here.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. No,
So
but go ahead.
Maybe in all hindsight, Ed looked at his mom, I don't know, like a Mother Mary figure. She was innocent. She was holy. She was the only one that has never sinned in his mind. Maybe that's the way she wanted to brainwash him as a child.
That's true. And after she had a second stroke, she was also drooling because she had another stroke. This one killed her. This was in December of 45. She was 67 years old. So the father died at 66. Yeah. The mother died at 67. So the father was obviously older than Augusta. That trollop getting with an older man. But Ed was naturally devastated. He had lost his only friend. I don't think he minded so much about the father and the brother. Screw them. But Augusta, he lost his mother. He was living alone out in that farmhouse, over almost 200 acres worth of land, all to himself with that house. And the house, though it was wired for electricity, at a certain unknown point, they ceased to have electricity in the house or indoor plumbing. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? And this was in Wisconsin in the winter. Can you imagine those winters?
I'm not familiar with the Wisconsin winters.
Freezing.
Yeah.
It's freezing. It's like he had a potbelly stove.
That's, yeah.
But you know what he did though? He only lived in like 2 rooms of the house. He walled off everything. Well, he didn't wall it off. He boarded it up. The living room, his mother's parlor, and his mother's bedroom. He left exactly as they were when she died. And he boarded them up, and he lived in a little side room and in the kitchen of this large farmhouse. You know, good-sized farmhouse. So years later, when they went into the house and they opened up these rooms, with the exception of dust, every room that his mother ever used was pristine.
He wanted to preserve her memory in a way.
Yeah, and he almost wanted to just preserve her, as we'll find out shortly, because he tried, he later admitted, to dig up his mother's body. But she died in December, and the ground was frozen, and he couldn't get to it. So he tried to keep his mother to such an extent that he attempted to dig up her body, but failed. Now that might sound weird, but you ain't seen nothing yet, because we haven't even entered into weirdness territory amongst all of these crazy things. He was a handyman in town, and he worked on the road crew. He was on the thrashing crew, which is where you would take the old sling blade out to the road and whip up all the weeds and get them out of there. And at a certain point in the 50s, he actually was receiving a farm subsidy from the U.S. government. So a lot of his bills were paid by this farm subsidiary, which I'm sure helped a little bit, but he still did, stuff around town. Apparently the people in town called him up often or got in touch with him however they could, because he didn't have electricity, They they sent him smoke signals, and they said, "Hey Ed, my door is broken. Will you come over here and fix it?" And puff puff, smoke signal, and then he would come over and fix it. They had no problem inviting Gein into their houses. They trusted him. He was a little odd, but small towns, there are odd people everywhere, especially in rural communities. So CW, are you ready to move into the stranger aspects of this story?
Lead the way, good sir.
I'm going to tell you about someone you may have heard of. Correct me if I'm wrong. You ever heard of Bernice Worden?
I have, sir. Yep.
She owned a hardware store there in Plainfield. And on the morning of November the 16th, 1957, Bernice Worden mysteriously went missing. Her store was locked up for the day, which never happened in the middle of the morning. And nobody could go to the hardware store to get whatever they needed, which was very unusual in Plainfield. So her son, who happened to be a deputy sheriff named Frank, at about 5 o'clock that evening, he went over to check on his mom. He had a key, so he let himself in. And to his shock, he found blood stains on the floor, the cash register open, and a receipt for a gallon of antifreeze. And he talked to some of the people, and some of the neighbors said that they saw a truck leaving out from behind the hardware store about 9:30 earlier that morning, which was around the time Bernice went missing. So upon closer examination, they found out that this gallon of antifreeze was sold, says this receipt, to Ed Gein. So they're like, Ed, huh? So the sheriff's deputies go out to Ed's house, and it's dark, and it's, I'd say they didn't go to the place till 5, so it's already dark at the farmhouse, no electricity. So they have some lanterns and some flashlights, and they're kind of looking around. And one of them went into the back shed with his flashlight. And he was in the dark, and he was trying to look around, maybe for another light source, and he bumped something. And he shined his flashlight on it, and it was Bernice Worden.
Yep.
And she was hanging upside down, naked, with her head removed. And she had been gutted, dressed like a deer, they said, hanging in the back shed. And so I'm sure this guy screams.
Yeah.
And so they let themselves into Ed's house on probable cause, shall we say?
Yeah.
And
that's
yeah, fair to say.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And they found all kinds of crazy shit in Ed's house. And I'm not just talking about the rooms that were boarded up. This house had 12 years of squalor, because that's how long it had been since Ed's mother died. And he'd been living in those 2 rooms. And he wasn't a very good housekeeper.
No.
So let's go through just a short list here of what they found in the house. And this doesn't include everything, okay? They found a wastebasket that was made of human skin.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, there was furniture, the cushions of which were upholstered in human skin.
There were skulls on his bedposts, eating bowls made out of skulls.
Oh, so he would chop off the top of the skull and he'd make a bowl out of it.
I guess it makes the oatmeal taste better.
Wow.
You've had a corset.
Yeah. Oh, would you? Yeah.
Yeah. There was also a vest made from the skin of a woman's chest, and leggings made from skin of a woman's legs. Not an item you would find at Lululemon, but an item at Ed Gein's house.
They called it the memory vest.
The memory vest.
The technical term for this fucking thing.
Yeah, they found Warden's head in a burlap sack.
They did, and they found her heart by the stove,
Yeah.
which makes you wonder if you got a heart by the stove, what are you going to do with it?
Oh, and one of my favorites, 9 vulvas in a shoebox.
Oh. All I got to say is,
why?
Well, I heard that 2 of those vulvas were children's.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, little girls. They also found masks made out of human female faces. They found some wigs that were actually human scalps. Yeah, so he had cut the scalp off of a woman and worn it like a wig. So this all goes into his bodysuit idea.
Yeah.
The vest, the leggings, the wig, the face. He was apparently trying to create a female bodysuit.
Yeah.
Because Ed used to walk around the house in his mother's clothing. And apparently he thought that if he could make a suit of a woman's skin and then put his mother's clothes on top, that would kind of turn him into his mother. But anyway, that's not all they found there.
Yeah, they also found Bernice's head in a bag in
the
kitchen. And it was her heart they found in the kitchen as
well. That's what ICW was saying. They found her head, and they found a belt made of nipples.
Yeah.
A belt made of nipples.
Yeah.
There was a pair of gloves made, I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
They found 4 noses.
Right.
That was like very random, yeah.
Yeah, just a random nose. Oh, my favorite one though. They found my favorite. One of the really most, I'll just say this, one of the most original ones was he had taken a pair of lips and put them on the drawstring of a lamp.
Yeah.
So when you pull the lips, you pull the lips and the lamp would come. He didn't have any fucking electricity, but the lamp would come on, I guess, when he had lights. And the shade of the lamp was made out of human flesh too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, geez, man, we're talking about some. Yeah, go ahead.
At least when he did kill somebody, waste not, want not. I mean, he used every part.
He did. Yeah.
As disturbing as it is, but you know.
Well, and this goes back to the boyish thing because they had Ed at this point. He didn't try to run or anything. They caught him and they took him back to the police station, and he didn't talk at first. You know how they got him to talk? They gave him a piece of apple pie with some cheese on top. And after he had his piece of pie, he told them everything. He just wanted a piece of pie. And what he would some of what he told them was that that a lot of these bones and body parts had been dug up over the course of 6 years at 3 local cemeteries. Sometimes he would get in this weird mood in the middle of the night, usually when there was a full moon out. And he said he would go into this state where it was like a trance-like state, and then he would drive over to the cemetery, and he would dig up recently buried bodies because he was one of these guys that watched the obituaries. And if a woman died, especially a woman, because he didn't seem very interested in men, and if the woman looked like his mother, that was another thing. If the woman reminded him of his mother, especially, he would go over after the day of the burial when the ground was still soft. And if you dug it up, it wouldn't look undisturbed, particularly because it hadn't settled yet. Yeah. And he would go down there and he'd pry the thing open and take out the body or just the parts that he wanted.
But to the mother, the difference is they were Jezebels. And
that's right.
Who cares?
Jezebel skin.
About those harlots. But he had begun building this bodysuit a long time ago. And this is a very important detail. They found a head that was in the house that was not Bernice Warden. They found another head. And it was a head that solved a 3-year-old mystery. Head of a woman named Mary Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mary Hogan used to own a tavern called Hogan's Tavern. She was a rough-talking lady. She was the kind of lady Augusta wouldn't have liked. Because she cussed like a sailor, they said in this thing. And she would have all the men over there, and she'd give it as good as she got. She was a tough broad, they used to say back then, which you would never dare say now. But in 1954, Ed used to go to this rowdy bar. And just imagine little Ed sitting in the corner of this bar. Like, you just don't see Ed roughing it up with the guys. You know, you just imagine him sitting over there in his woolen cap and watching. And in amazement, this woman cursing. Oh my God, she's cursing. But some people thought that maybe he saw this woman, Mary Hogan, as the dark side of his mother, because she looked similar and was similar in age to his mother. She's an older woman. And she was everything Augusta would never be. So maybe he had a bit of an attraction to this woman in the same way he had to his mother, but she was the naughty version. What do you think of the possibilities of that, CW?
Maybe, in a way, she was filling a void that his mother never filled for him.
Oh yeah, she could be the thing that his mother didn't want her. I mean, she could be maybe the sexual aspect of this thing, because his mother would have shied away from the sexual part, but maybe
The
Mary Hogan, unrepressed,
Yes.
Yeah.
they called her Bloody Mary, which seems appropriate. But anyway, on the afternoon, December 8th, all this shit happened in December. It was something about December with Ed. But on the afternoon of December the 8th, 1954, a local guy stopped into Mary's tavern there to have a drink. And he found a chair overturned and a little pool of blood on the floor, as if someone had been attacked, fell over, and was then dragged away. But there was no body. There was some money laying around. 3 years, nobody knew what happened to Mary Hogan. But something that's kind of funny, and I'd like to get your reaction on this, CW, is when Ed was around town and people would mention Mary Hogan, because it kind of became a legend, whatever happened to Mary Hogan? She just vanished. He used to say, oh, I got her up at my house.
And I mean, by saying something like that, no one is going to take that serious.
Right. They thought he was joking. They thought, oh, you got Mary up there, sure.
Right?
What? He wasn't lying.
Oh.
No, he had her face in a paper bag and her skull in a box.
She was up there, all right. Do we ever know what happened to the rest of her?
I'm not sure. Did they ever find all the rest of her remains?
I don't know, unless it was amongst the bones. I only ever heard.
She was the lazy boy recliner.
There were a lot of bone fragments and miscellaneous body parts that were never identified.
That's true. That's true. So she might have been amongst them. Ed apparently confessed later. He said that he shot her and he put her on a sled and he sledded her ass right on home. And he kept her there. But that's not the only possible. Well, we know he killed Mary Hogan and we know he killed Bernice Worden. Can't deny that because they were in the house. Yeah. But there is another case of a possible victim. Is that right?
Yeah. Now, there's not a whole lot of detail on it, but the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley. Born Evelyn Grace Hartley, November 21st, 1937, La Crosse County, Wisconsin. Disappeared October 24th, 1953, at 15 years old in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. Status is currently at missing for 65 years, 8 months, and 14 days. She was never found, and they speculated at the time of her disappearance in 53, Ed Gein actually was in La Crosse County. They speculated that he may have had something to do with the disappearance, but they've never had any evidence to tie him to it. And he never confessed to it.
And she was babysitting at the time, as I recall.
I'm pretty sure, yes. Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because Ed used to babysit.
He did.
So I don't know if that's any sort of a connection there. I mean, it is kind of odd that you live next, and then you mysteriously vanish just like these other. So she would have been chronologically first, Hartley. If you don't count, the brother Henry, who he may or may not have killed. If he killed Hartley, it would have been Hartley, Hogan, and then Bernice.
Yes. Yeah. When she disappeared, it sparked a search involving 2,000 people in the first year following her disappearance. They questioned more than 3,500 people as of up until 2019, this year.
Wow.
With still no trace of her body ever been found.
Now, it's interesting because I did read that they found a young girl's dress in Ed's house.
They did.
But I would imagine if that matched Hartley's, you would have not. I mean, that would have been obvious. So it must not have been hers. But at least it shows he has an interest in young girls because, as I said before, a couple of those vulvas were young.
Anyone's not familiar with Evelyn? That's her. Right there.
15 years old.
15 years old. And still missing to right now.
Wow. Oh, it's amazing that this year they're still. And when was that? In 1953?
October 24th, 53. She was listed as disappeared. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing that they're still going. But, you have to keep an investigation active. And it's good that they are. After all, go ahead.
I was going to say, especially when there's ties to a possibility of an Ed Gein trial or not trial anymore, Gein is dead. But, yeah, I mean, if it's possible that Ed Gein had any ties to it, they're probably going to want a cold case reopened or re-looked at. I mean, peace of mind for the family.
Right.
Something along those lines, right? And her parents were Richard Hartley and Ethel Hartley.
And I'm sure they're probably gone now.
I would imagine.
Well, eventually Ed Gein's known victims did get a little bit of justice because in 1957 they brought Ed to trial. They arraigned him on the murder of Bernice Worden. The reason they didn't do both is apparently because of financial concerns, because this was a very small town. They didn't want to necessarily do two trials. And if they could put him away for one trial, what's the point of doing the one for Mary Hogan? So, but they had a month-long psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Gein, which was probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. And they deemed that he was schizophrenic.
Yep.
And so instead of going to prison, he was actually committed. He was committed to a maximum security hospital for the criminally insane. And he spent the rest of his life there, causing apparently no trouble. He was always, that's one of the things that's really interesting to me about Gein, is he's not an overtly aggressive man. He's basically, he never really shows any signs of violence. The only thing that was weird that they used to say was that when he was in the hospital, sometimes during the full moon, he would get into these weird trances. Mm-hmm. And he would start talking about women and what he would like to do with them. But then when the full moon set, he would go back to normal. And it didn't always happen, but every so often Ed would have one of these moments, almost as if the moon itself had triggered this psychosis of his, the more violent side of it, or the more aggressive, insane side. Other than that, he pretty much just laid in bed and was very quiet, kept to himself, read newspapers, read books, didn't do anything.
No, other than that, he was a model citizen.
Yeah. A seemingly normal guy.
Right. Like I said earlier, he was almost like the uncle figure to everybody in town.
Yeah. And the attention of this in the late 50s brought a massive amount of media coverage for that time period. I mean, obviously, CNN is not descending. Yes. But, a lot of people went to Plainfield because they were like, oh, my God, what happened there? Who did it? Who was he? And they started looking into that. And also they had to deal with what was going to happen to all of his land and property. He had what would be today $41,000 worth of land and property. That was a lot of property. Mm-hmm. by today's standards, that's a lot. But back then, that's pretty exceptional. His house and his possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on March 30th of 1958. But rather mysteriously, the house burned down with everything inside it.
Yeah.
Now, no one knows what happened to the house, but a lot of people think, that some of the townsfolk decided, let's kind of get rid of this. Because it could be auctioned off to some guy who's going to use it as an attraction.
Turn it into a circus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the good going rate on a belt made out of nipples these days?
I know, right? Jeez.
Right.
Oh, that they took Ed's car. Someone actually did get a hold of his car and used it in the carny circuit. They would go around as Ed Gein's car. They tint it over, and you could pay a few cents or whatever, and you'd go in and see the car Ed Gein drove the bodies around in. So judging from that, maybe someone would have bought the house and turned it into an attraction. People of Plainfield were like, oh, no, we're not having this. So a couple of them just decided to burn it down, is what it sounds like to me. Maybe it was accidental, but it seems like hell of a timing, because 10 days later they were going to do this auction, and now there's nothing to auction other than the land itself. It's kind of funny because somebody went into Ed's cell when it happened and told him, that his house burned down, and he apparently just kind of shrugged and was like, just as well. Not much of a reaction to it. I mean, he was gone. He wasn't going back there anyway at this point. So, now good old Ed. I got to tell you what happened to Ed, CW. It's pretty tragic. Ed Gein had lung cancer.
Yep.
And he died 2 days after my third birthday. He was a little bit older, 77. And July 26, 1984. And respiratory failure from lung cancer. Now, he was buried there in his hometown. Kind of interesting to note that his headstone had been chipped away by many souvenir seekers over the years. They made Swiss cheese out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided to take the headstone away, which they did.
His grave is unmarked as of now.
Right. Yeah. So you know where he is, but there's no marker. If you wanted to go there.
I'm surprised they didn't cremate him or something. Just so grave robbers and.
Oh, that's a good point.
Do what he did to other people.
That's right. That's true. I'd never thought about that, because I'm surprised no one tried to dig up Ed, put him on display, have him sitting in the car.
In a way, I'm surprised somebody never tried to make a Gein suit.
Oh yes, that's right. You could, though. They certainly made a lot of money on true crime.
Yeah,
books and we have to talk about one thing for sure. Because who is the one person that's probably influenced more horror movies in the past 100 years than anybody else? I think it's safe to say that Ed Gein has been the source of some of the great horror franchises and just single films that we know of in some which way or another. I mean, let's start with the most obvious one, shall we, CW? Let's talk about Robert Bloch's 1959 book. Now, Robert Bloch was a suspense and mystery writer who happened to be living in Wisconsin when this case was happening, when it broke. And a couple years later, he put out a book called Psycho, which was about a guy who in the book is described to look very similar to Ed Gein, who had a mother fixation. He owned a motel. Ed Gein did not. And he wanted to keep his mother alive by wearing her clothes. But in the book and the subsequent Hitchcock movie that came out a year later, he actually did get her body and keep it. Spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. Yeah, basically he's the reason why Norman Bates was a creation into a character.
Yeah.
Psycho. He, as that character Norman, as you know, anyone that has watched the show or Psycho movie itself or whatever, he had one hell of a serious complex.
Yeah, he walked around in his house, talked in the voice. I mean, yeah, something I've often wanted to do? I wish there were time machines because Psycho is one of my all-time favorite films. She knows this, of all time. I mean, it's just one of my all-time favorites. I think it's so well written by Joe Stefano, so well directed by Hitchcock, and so well acted by just about everybody in it. That it's just almost a perfect movie. The music by Bernard Herrmann works with a movie in a way that I've scarcely seen before or since. The music is actually like a physical part of the film. It's amazing. But before I geek out too much on Psycho, I just want to say that, yeah, I mean, if you think about Norman Bates, he is an awful lot like Ed Gein, especially with the mother thing. He was made to look a little more attractive though in the movie with the late great Anthony Perkins.
Mm-hmm.
But
and also the mother hated all the women.
Yeah.
And when he was kind of attracted to one, that's when it was time to
take her out. That's right. When Norman got sexually attracted to a woman, that would trigger mother. And she would grab her dress and her wig and her knife and go to town. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite lines is in that series, even though it's not the best one in the series, but was a Psycho 4: The Beginning, where Henry Thompson jumps in the back of the car with the woman in the front, and he's like, "Drive, huh?" The voice. And another one is in part 3. Now, part 3, I've spoken about this on another show, but I'm going to mention it now because CW, you are a huge horror film fan as well, obviously.
I am.
I think part 3 is a hugely underappreciated horror film, the one that Anthony Perkins actually directed. I think it is really, really horribly interesting. It's visually very different and fascinating. The transitions are odd. The Carter Burwell score is amazing. It's a very good movie. I wish more people talked about Psycho 3.
I don't want to say too much about it. If you haven't watched it, watch it. But I found it was done differently than part 1 or 2. Yeah, big time underrated. I will say that. I will agree with you there. And we'll just leave that as is and let people watch it for their own. But
you have to watch Psycho 3. I'm giving you a recommendation right now. You need to watch it. Great performance by Jeff Fahey, who is another underappreciated actor, Lawnmower Man.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out. Now, I'm not going to go into I'll do a whole Psycho show and geek out on that at some point. But I wanted to point that out because numero uno primo was of Ed Gein influences was Psycho, because the book came out right after. But there are more.
Yes, such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974 film. The whole idea of Leatherface wearing a human skin mask, and also bones that were made into furniture.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
So that first Texas Chainsaw, CW, how much did that influence you?
I was born in 82. I'm not giving my age away. I was only a young little pup when I seen that. And I grew up on films as such. I mean, watching Leatherface back in the day and whatnot, and Psycho. Don't get me wrong, but I love all of the Chainsaw films. Any character or any actor that has portrayed Leatherface, all had their own take on it. There were different variables and different versions in a way, but the true heart of the story was always the same. For the most part.
Yeah. And it was very Ed Gein inspired.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, you go into a house, you see lamps made out of bones and flesh. Even the mask Leatherface wore was people's faces. And yeah, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that influenced horror films as much as Ed Gein.
Absolutely. Even the childlike quality of Leatherface. I don't think Ed Gein was quite that childlike in terms of being non-verbal and stuff, obviously, but it's an exaggeration. But you look at the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, especially, and something that always struck me about that movie is just how much that feels like you're with these people, and this is something that's happening, and you just happen to be there. It's very real, and the acting is awfully good for non-professionals. Really awfully good. No clunkiness at all. But there was another movie that came out the same year as Texas Chainsaw that was really directly influenced by Ed Gein. It was a movie called Deranged. You ever see that?
I have. It's been quite a while, but I have, yeah.
And that was pretty much Ed Gein. That's as close as you got to like just doing Ed Gein. And like I say, that just happened to be the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. That's an interesting movie to look up. Tom Savini, it was one of the first movies that he ever did effects for. So that's its kind of claim to fame. He was an assistant, actually, on that. That was before he started doing them by himself. But check out Deranged. No one ever hardly talks about it. But if you want to see like a straight-up adaptation of Ed Gein, probably the first straight-up adaptation of Ed Gein, because God knows there's been several, and not very good necessarily.
Yeah.
But that would be one to check out.
That'd be a good one for the Savini fans, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And in 1988, the book Silence of the Lambs comes out by Thomas Harris. And a few years later, in 1991, the movie comes out, which I remember when that was released. Yeah, that's another big Ed Gein influenced.
Because it was Buffalo Bill making the bodysuit.
Buffalo Bill's bodysuit.
James Gumb was actually a kind of an interesting amalgam of several killers we've talked about on this show. He has some qualities of Ted Bundy and how he captured his women. He had the Ed Gein thing of making the bodysuit. Thomas Harris drew from several. And he did that with Dollarhide, too, in the earlier book in Red Dragon.
Yeah.
Now, I got to say, I am an awful big fan of Thomas Harris. I haven't read the last book, the one he just did that didn't have anything to do with Hannibal Lecter. But I did enjoy all of his Lecter books. He has a great style. But I always think it's funny because, Stephen King used to say, why doesn't Thomas Harris, like, what is he doing when he's not writing? Because he's famous for having, like, one book every 15 years come out. Yeah. Which, Steve King does like two books a year. But apparently Thomas Harris finds the act of writing to be almost intolerably painful. So he just slowly writes a book and then finally blessedly gets done with it. But they're hella books, I tell you. I love his books.
And there's still even modern films coming out right now are still doing little throwbacks, if you watch certain films or whatnot, to Ed Gein and all that too. A individual both of us know, David, he acted as Art. You're familiar with in Terrifier when they did the body. Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, David had the Ed Gein body suit thing going. And he was on your show. Did he tell you the story about doing that? Like
sock?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was nice to see. Yeah, he did tell the story, but I got to say something about that particular scene. What they added it. It's really good and nice to see that Damien went ahead and threw that little homage in there when they did the film. But anybody that hasn't heard the sock story, would you like to tell the crowd?
Well, I almost feel remiss because David tells it so much better. David and I have talked. David's a friend of mine, and we've talked, done some conventions. And he was actually on this show talking to me, but I can't remember if that's where we talked about the sock story. I want to say he told it to me privately, but I know he's talked about it. So I would have to. Did he tell the story on your show?
He told the story on the show, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to just say, I'm going to reiterate, you got to go watch CW's show, Carl's Creep Show. Watch the episode with David Howard Thornton and hear the story, because he tells it very well about
You should put a link in the comment section.
You actually can find a link in the comment section to Carl's. I'm way ahead of you, Beck.
Okay, I'm just,
Yeah.
He's got my back.
That's right. I got my boy here. If you go to the Facebook comments, you'll see a link. And if you go to this YouTube video description, there's a link for Carl's channel. So go down there and watch the episode he did with David Thornton. Because David is always a fun guest. I just like David personally. He's a really nice guy.
He is high energy, very easygoing guy.
And few people know this. He's actually from the same state in America as I am. He's from Alabama, too.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. I found it odd that, or maybe I got to ask this now. Am I correct in saying you guys have not worked on a film together?
We have not as of yet, no. But I would love to. I enjoy David very much, and I think he's fun to work with. I enjoy hanging around him personally. I imagine he would be a lot of fun to work with. But I love the success he's having with Terrifier, and the sequel will be coming out soon. So. It's the sequels will start filming soon. I'll put it that way. It's gonna be next year before it comes out, but that ain't too long. You know how these films go.
Oh yeah, proud to say I'm a backer for the film. So. Oh,
excellent, excellent. You and many others, because I think there's a lot of anticipation for Terrifier 2. Before I forget though, I want to mention another Ed Gein true crime book, because this is a famous one. It was called Deviant. If you want to read like the best, in my opinion, Ed Gein true crime book, it was written by a guy named Harold Schechter.
Okay.
And if you ever watch Ed Gein documentaries, you'll see Harold on there, because he's interviewed and everything. And okay, I love you, Harold. I don't know you, but I love your work. But I'm just going to tell you one thing. If you ever hear Harold talk, you kind of wonder if he's a serial killer. Because he has this weird cadence to his voice where he's like, and then there was a bull, and he cut the top of the bull off, and he made a bull out of it, of the skull. And you go, God, Harold, are we checking his basement? But no. But he's a great true crime author, and I would recommend you check out Harold's stuff.
I haven't read that book. I will have to get it.
Yeah, check out Deviant. And for those of you watching, check it out. So yeah, we've touched on a lot of good Ed Gein material and a lot of things that he influenced today. I think we've had a good Ed Gein hour.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? But yeah, I mean, I guess in hindsight and in closing, Ed was, in a way, I guess, the first really American quintessential serial killer when you think of that sort of thing. Even though he only really apparently killed 2 people, I think there's a pretty good indication that he also killed his brother. What do you think, CW? Do you think he took out Henry?
It's possible. I think personally he fessed up to the 2 murders. If he did it before the man died, I think he would have fessed up to Henry and Evelyn.
Well, that's true. He never said that he killed his brother. That's right. He only ever said, Bernice and Mary Hogan.
Yeah. And the one other point, actually, little point that we never made there. According to the mathematics on the time frame from when he was speculated on killing Mary Hogan and whatnot, and when she was found disappeared, her disappearance happened and whatnot. Am I correct in saying that he would have been at like 46, 47 years old?
Yes. Yeah, around that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's odd that, as you know, I mean, serial killers typically start killing at a younger age. And to be 46, 47, 48 years old and then start, it is something something not right.
Well, she and I were talking about this actually before we went on the air. Like, what are the chances that Ed Gein killed people that we just don't know about?
Yeah.
And that's true enough. That is true enough.
Maybe people when he was even younger than, because the first person, as you said, the first official victim, which would have been Mary Hogan, he was in his 40s. So did he just start killing then, or
did the death of Mother make him go?
Or did that trigger it? Yeah, that's a good point too.
That's
Yeah.
a very valid point. That's me and my fiance were talking about that earlier, and it is a big possibility that the death of Mama, shall we say, something snapped overnight, and he went after all the harlots, shall we say?
And particularly because he's isolated in that house. I mean,
He's living
Yeah.
with his own fantasies.
yeah.
All Ed's got is Ed's imagination. He used to really like reading those true crime novels, and also he seemed to have a particular fascination with Nazi stories.
Yeah.
Which, if you know anything about some of the Nazi stuff, they would do things with skin.
They would. They would. Here's food for thought for you with Evelyn Hartley. She was never found. There was no evidence ever tying Gein to her. But what if he did kill her? And the reason why they never found her was he cannibalized her.
And I think there is a good point that could be made there, because when you see the heart next to the stove, it kind of makes you wonder what he was intending to do with the heart in the stove. Maybe he did do that. I don't know. That I think it's a distinct possibility that he could have taken a taste.
Very, very big possibility.
And plus, he had to feed himself. And that's a cheap way of eating.
That is true.
That's just horrible to think about. But
It is horrible to think about, but it is possible.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about Jeffrey Dahmer on a previous show, and we all know what Jeff did. That bastard. But anyway, we'll talk about, we've hit on a lot of good Ed Gein stuff here, and our time is just about up. Unfortunately, these hours just fly by. But I do want to thank you guys for watching, and I also want to thank Rebecca here, my frequent collaborator at this point, and CW. I hope you enjoyed guesting on this show. I know we enjoyed having you.
Yeah, man, it was an awesome time. Honored to be on. And down the road, if you ever need me back, let me know.
All right. We'll definitely have you back on here. In fact, you and I have mentioned possibly doing another show about a certain person, which I won't say because we got to keep it secret. But if we do that, CW, if you want to do that, that'd be a good one as well.
What is it they say in showbiz? Always want them more. Always leaving them wanting more.
That's right.
Right.
So on that note, I think we shall leave them wanting more today. So everybody, thank you for watching. And I want to thank my two guests today. Make sure to take care of yourselves. I'll see you next week.